We're going to cover here the use of the stroke and the fill. Now in the toolbox, these are the area. This is the fill, this white square here, and this is the stroke, this black, what looks like a frame. If you click on the stroke, it comes to the foreground and is active. So if I wanted to, I'm going to move my color swatches over here. If I wanted to make the stroke not black but red, I click on it, it turns red. If I bring this, that's the fill, I'm sorry, the fill is red. If I bring the stroke forward, it's white right now. If I wanted to make it green, I click on a green. Now these are pre-made swatches. You can make custom colors work there as well, but I'm just using these now for convenience. So if I hit this little curved arrow, that changes the color. Whatever was the stroke becomes the fill, and vice versa. And still, if you wanted to bring it forward, it has to be forward in order to change its color or do something to it. But as you either switch them or bring it forward, you can change the color. So the square is the fill, and the framing is the stroke. That's to remind you, the stroke is a line, and the fill is a shape. Now, if you want the fill to be nothing, it can't be white, because white is a color, and white against white, it's hard to see it, but white against blue, it's very obvious what's happening. So if you don't want a fill, then you have to hit this red diagonal. It sits here or it sits over here in the color swatches. Anywhere you look, you can see that red diagonal. So if you want this to be no color, you hit the red diagonal. And when it's no color, then it's not going to be anything in the no color in the fill. Now if I change this over, I now have a blue fill and no stroke. Now let me show you how that works in Illustrator. I'm going to take my pre-shaped tools. This is the rectangle tool, and it's found down here in this toolbox, but remember I opened it up with that little black triangle, and I've hit the tear off pad here, and I've actually torn it off and set it up here, so I've customized my toolbox. If I take this rectangle tool and just click and drag, I can make a rectangle. I can bring the rectangle center anchor point, that X, to my center line of the page. It's at 4 1/4, and I actually put it in the center of the page. Now what happens here is, with the bounding box turned on, you have corners. At each corner is a open bounding box that you can affect things with it. If I come up here and use the shift key to make it enlarge, you see I've got the enlargement tool by getting the diagonal arrows. If I get the curved arrows, that means it's going to rotate on that center point. Command Z, I'm going to put it back. But if I come over here and get the shift key and the option key, the shift key, it just grows from left to right. If I use the option key as well, it grows from the center out, and I can expand it and change the size proportionately. If I grab this and don't use the shift key, then I can change it drastically to a narrow rectangle as opposed to what it was before. Command Z puts it back. Okay, now in this case, if I deselect it, there is no stroke going around it. See, no stroke. If I bring the stroke back and bring it forward and give it a lime green color so you can see it, well, first of all, I have to select my piece back here again. Now, the color I just selected ends up down here, the most recently selected. So I can either go back and find that green, or here it is right there, and I put it in there. Now when I click off, it's going to be hard to see that, but there is a green stroke around there. If I come back again and say go to my stroke palette, in with the characters, it's a 1-point stroke. Let's click that up, 3, 4, 5, hitting the up arrow so that the numbers gets bigger. And you can see now I've got a 20-point stroke around the outside. Now remember, you see this blue line right here? That's the actual stroke without any added weight or color. It's a 0 point, but it does define where the stroke is. That's also the edge of this blue rectangle. Now, when I put 20 points on, that means there's 10 points to the right of the line and 10 points to the left of the line. So if I had 27 points, that it would be something 0.5 on one side and something 0.5 on the other side. So it begins to eat into the rectangle. Now, it doesn't hurt this rectangle, but if it was a very narrow rectangle, you can see that it's really starting to affect things, and it might eat up everything that's on the inside. Command Z takes me back to where I was. So we don't use I don't use the stroke as a framing device. It just gets in the way, especially if you've got narrow shapes. So in this case, I'm going to turn that stroke off. The stroke, you can see, is back to nothing here because it's not showing. Now, if you want to do other things with that stroke and fill, let's say, I'm going to move this off to the side here. Let's say I want to draw something, and I'll go back to a black line here now. Black, and I'm going to not fill, but a stroke. And there's the stroke. It's black. Now, in the case of, let's just use this pencil for a freehand drawing. If I just take the pencil and click on it and wander around with my mouse or making shapes here, that's a line. And it's a 1-point stroke. It comes up automatically. I can come over here, and if I want to, I can click it up bigger, 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 if that's the shape I want and what I'm using it for. But it doesn't make a lot of sense unless the particular thing you're working on requires that you to do that. That is a line. If I use my drawing tool and click and release and then hold the shift key down and click and release, I get another line. Note the difference. We're going to talk about drawing with lines in a while, but note the difference. This is a straight line. This is a curved line. But it's still a line because it's not a shape until it closes on each other. Let me show you the closing shape. If I'm drawing with a line, click and release, click and release, click and release, I can go anywhere I want here. I'm getting straight lines to form this shape. But at some point, I'm going to come back from the last anchor point to the first anchor point. And you see that little zero that shows up there? That means you're connecting the line, and it's connecting itself into a shape. So now it's a shape, where this is not a shape because it isn't closed. Now with this, drawing it this way, I can leave it that way and there's no fill, there's just a stroke. Or if I select this and say, let's switch the stroke to the fill, now there's no stroke and the fill is black. And I have a shape here that has no stroke around it. So that's the difference between the stroke and the fill. And I can select this shape now, and I can change its color to anything I so choose. And we'll talk about colors and making custom colors, but this is the shape now is taking on that color I made it. Now, if I select this unclosed shape and make it the stroke go to the fill, it throws color in there, but there's no connecting line here. If I go out of color, Command Y takes me out of color. You can see there's no end there. And many times you're going to be working on something and it isn't working out, it isn't working out, it isn't working out, because you don't have these two lines connected. If I need to connect these, I come back to it and select it, and I'm still out of color, so I'm only seeing the actual stroke line. I can take my pen tool and click back into this anchor point, and then I can do whatever I want to do and come around and finish this off. And when I come back to the original one, see the zero show up by the pinpoint? When I do that, and then I'll come back into color, Command Y brings me back to color, you can see I've got now that shape. It's now got a line here, line here, line here, and it closes on itself. So remember that you have to keep track of what the stroke and the fill is. In many cases, you're going to only use the fill, but you will draw in the stroke to get it to be what you want so you can see it, and then you'll switch it to the fill color, and it doesn't have to stay black, it can be anything you want. But always keep track of what's going on down in here with the stroke and the fill, and sometimes it's nothing. If you want an invisible line, you make them both nothing. So if I come up here and say that's black and now I make it nothing, see when I click away from it, you can't see it. It's there, it's an invisible line. There's a line, but it's invisible. And sometimes that's necessary, and some of the things we get into a little later on is to use an invisible line to make that work. But keep track of your stroke and your fill, and every time you open this toolbox, it'll open with a black and a white. You'll have to change the white to nothing, and then get on with working with whatever you're going to work with. That's important. Every time you turn on Illustrator, you're going to need to know what's the stroke and what's the fill.